Ram asked, "Since that which is cannot cease to be, and since what is not cannot exist, how can awareness, experience, be made non-awareness or non-experience?" This question follows on from the last chapter to do with action, which was defined as perception or awareness of objects. So awareness of objects. And cessation of such awareness was described as emancipation. So Ram is asking, how can awareness be made into non-awareness? Which doesn't really make much sense, does it? Vasishta replied, "It is true that that which is ceases not, and that which is not does not exist. Experience and non-experience are also that simple and easy of accomplishment. For the word experience and what is indicated by it are born of falsehood or delusion. Hence they give rise to sorrow. Abandon this awareness of experience and remain established in the awareness of the highest wisdom. The latter is nirvana." And it's also suitably vague, isn't it? Give up notions of experience. There's only what is going on. There are also our ideas about what is going on. And it's these ideas which we can drop. That sounds simple enough, but we have a fetishistic desire and enthralment to these ideas. We have a very deep belief that somehow we know how reality works. We've got things sized up, perhaps not in detail, but in terms of the general gist of things, we've got a good idea how things work. We might think it's a pretty wonderful world we live in, or we might think it's a really shitty place, or we might switch between the two. But however we feel about it, we're pretty convinced that that's actually how it is. And we feed notions of experience into that feeling. And if you think it is a pretty bad place, well, it's certainly easy enough to get lots of evidence to fit into that. We get bombarded by it through the news media telling us how terrible things are. That somehow seems more realistic, to assume that the world is a horrible place. That's the reality, isn't it? This is our fetishistic notion. This is the notion of the world that we have a fetishistic enthralment to, based on our experience. Abandon this awareness of experience is put in quote marks here, and remain established in the awareness of the highest wisdom. The wisdom is what you get when you look into it, when you pursue inquiry, and when you realize there is no experience because there's no ego. There's no real self apart from a conventionally agreed notion of a self. There's only experiencing going on. Good and evil actions cease when it is realized that they do not exist in reality. This was Ram's original question. Why are we encouraged to be good and to avoid being bad? This is only necessary when we identify with the ego. When we identify with our notion of an individual self, then of course we should try and be good and avoid being bad. But if we look beyond things and there's no ego, then we just behave appropriately. Hence one should inquire into the root of action till that root is destroyed. When you look into the roots of action, you're looking into the roots of the ego sense. For just as everything that springs from the earth is non-different from the earth, even so all that arises out of consciousness is non-different from consciousness. So it's all consciousness. That should be obvious, really. How can it not be consciousness? If there was no consciousness, there wouldn't be anything. It's only by the fact that there's consciousness that there is anything. Liquidity is non-different from liquid. In the same way, in Brahman there is no division even between the mind and consciousness. The mind here would be in the sense of the cognitive process, that which creates notions that we get attached to. The activity known as awareness arises without a cause in that consciousness. Hence it is as good as non-existent, being non-different from consciousness. So we realize the supreme nature of everything, which is pure consciousness. And in that realization we don't need to worry about good and bad. Action is rooted in the body, which is rooted in the ego sense. If the apprehension of the ego sense is abandoned, it ceases. Thus is the root of action destroyed. They in whom action has thus ceased are eager neither to renounce nor to possess. They remain established in what is, and their actions are spontaneous. In fact, they do nothing. As objects borne down by a flood move non-volitionally, they work merely with their organs of action. When the mind abandons its conditioning, the objects lose their temptation. So when you live in this supreme awareness, you're living in a state of harmony. There's no anxiety. Such an understanding or awakening of intelligence alone is the abandonment of action. What is the use of doing or of desisting? It is the cessation of the awareness of action and of experience, the giving up of conditioning, and thus the attainment of peace and the state of equilibrium that is known by the expression abandonment of action. So abandonment of action isn't really abandoning anything. When non-abandonment or false abandonment is mistaken for abandonment, the deluded ones, who are like ignorant animals, are possessed by the goblin of abandonment of activity. And this is a misunderstanding which comes out of literally understanding traditional yogic teachings, which is all about renunciation, giving things up. For they who have rightly understood the truth concerning abandonment of action have nothing whatsoever to do with activity, nor with inactivity. They don't need to make a point of doing things, they don't need to make a point of giving anything up. They enjoy supreme peace whether they live in their house or in a forest. To the peaceful, a house is like a forest, and to the restless, even a forest is like a crowded city. To one who is at peace, the entire world is a peaceful forest. To one who is restless with 1,000 thoughts, it is an ocean of sorrow.